The evening light settles gently over the Acropolis of Athens, casting long shadows across the weathered marble of the Parthenon as tourists gather to witness sunset paint the ancient stones in warm amber hues. In this quiet hour, when the crowds thin and the modern world seems to pause, it becomes easier to imagine how different this sacred hill once looked at the austere landscape of white marble that has defined our vision of ancient Greece for centuries, but a vibrant tapestry of colors so brilliant they would seem almost impossible to our modern eyes, accustomed to the myth of pristine, unpainted stone dot as twilight deepens around the temple's weathered columns. Archaeologists and art historians who work here often reflect on one of the most significant discoveries in classical studies, the revelation that Greek temples, including this crown jewel of ancient architecture, were originally painted in vivid blues, reds, and golds that would have made them visible from miles away across the Attic plain. The serene white marble surfaces we admire today represent not the original vision of ancient architects and artists, but rather the result of 24 centuries of weather, war, and the gradual erosion of pigments that once transformed these structures into something closer to the colorful Hindu temples of India than the austere neoclassical buildings they inspired during the Renaissance. In the gathering dusk, the story of how this crucial understanding emerged unfolds like a detective tale spanning centuries. Renaissance artists and scholars, encountering Greek and Roman ruins that had been stripped of their original colors by time and weather, concluded that pure white marble represented the height of classical aesthetic achievement. This misconception became so deeply embedded in European artistic consciousness that when archaeologists in the 19th century began uncovering better preserved sculptures and architectural elements that still bore traces of paint, many scholars initially refused to accept the evidence, going so far as to scrub away remaining pigments in their determination to preserve what they believed was the pure classical ideal. The evening air around the Parthenon carries with it the whispered secrets of advanced scientific techniques that have revolutionized our understanding of ancient polychromy, the Greek term meaning many colors that describes the original appearance of classical architecture. Modern archaeologists like Vinzenz Brinkmann and Ulrich Koch Brinkmann have spent decades using raking light and ultraviolet photography to reveal faint traces of the elaborate color schemes that once adorned temple walls, columns, and sculptural decorations. Under special lighting conditions, invisible patterns emerge on seemingly blank marble surfaces. Intricate designs, detailed facial features on statues, and complex geometric borders that guided the original painters in their work. As night deepens around the ancient citadel, the technical details of this artistic resurrection become as fascinating as the visual results. Ancient Greek painters created their brilliant colors from minerals, plants, and even animals, grinding stones like azurite and malachite to produce blues and greens, extracting deep reds from cinnabar, and creating the most prized purple dye from murex snails collected along Mediterranean shores. Egyptian blue, one of the world's first synthetic pigments, provided a brilliant azure that has proven remarkably durable, surviving in protected locations where later archaeologists could detect its chemical signature even after the visible color had long since faded. The Parthenon itself, glowing softly in the evening light, serves as the most dramatic example of how completely our perception of Greek architecture has been transformed by this research. Scientific analysis has revealed that the temple's famous sculptural frieze, the Parthenon marbles that once depicted the Pantheistic procession, was originally painted in rich polychromy that brought carved figures to vivid life. The horses would have been painted in realistic browns and blacks, their bridles picked out in gold. The human figures would have worn clothing in deep blues and rich reds. And metal objects like shields and spear points would have been covered in actual bronze or gold leaf that caught and reflected the Mediterranean sunlight in the quiet hours before dawn. When the marble columns catch the first pale light from the east, it becomes possible to imagine the original impact these painted temples would have had on ancient visitors. The careful application of color served not merely decorative purposes, but practical and symbolic ones as well. Bright pigments help define architectural elements that might otherwise blend together when viewed from ground level, while specific color combinations carried religious and cultural meanings that communicated important information to worshippers approaching the sacred precincts. The alternating blue and red pattern of Doric temple friezes, for example, created a visual rhythm that guided the eye around the building, while the contrasting colors made individual sculptural panels easier to read from a distance. The systematic use of color in Greek temple architecture reveals a sophisticated understanding of how paint could enhance rather than obscure the underlying stone carving. Structural elements like columns and architraves were typically left in their natural marble color or covered with white stucco, while decorative details received the full spectrum of available pigments. This approach created a hierarchical system where the most important sculptural and ornamental elements commanded attention through their brilliant colors, while the basic architectural framework provided a neutral background that unified the overall composition. Modern attempts to reconstruct the original appearance of painted Greek temples face significant challenges that highlight just how much knowledge was lost when the colors faded. Contemporary artists and scholars must analyze microscopic paint fragments to determine not only which pigments were used, but how they might have appeared when fresh, since many organic colors change dramatically over time. Ancient sources like Pliny the Elder's Natural History provide some guidance about pigment preparation and application techniques, but many details about brushwork, color mixing, and artistic style must be inferred from the physical evidence that survives. Revelations about Greek temple polychromy extend far beyond mere aesthetic considerations to touch on fundamental questions about cultural identity, artistic values, and historical interpretation. The Renaissance idealization of white marble was deeply connected to European notions of racial and cultural superiority that associated bright colors with primitive or barbaric peoples, while viewing monochromatic restraint as evidence of sophisticated civilization. Goethe's famous observation that savage nations, uneducated people, and children have a great predilection for vivid colors, while people of refinement avoid vivid colors, perfectly captures the cultural biases that made it difficult for European scholars to accept evidence of ancient polychromy, even when confronted with clear physical proof. As morning light begins to illuminate the Parthenon's weathered surfaces, contemporary efforts to digitally reconstruct the original painted appearance of Greek temples provide glimpses of how dramatically different the ancient world looked from our modern expectations. These technological recreations, while necessarily speculative in their details, demonstrate that classical Greek culture was far more visually exuberant and emotionally expressive than the austere philosophical ideal promoted by later European interpreters. The bright colors that once adorned temple walls and sculptural decorations suggest a religious and cultural life that was intensely visual, deeply sensual, and profoundly connected to the natural world from which the pigments themselves were derived. The implications of these discoveries extend into contemporary museum practice and public education, as institutions worldwide grapple with how to present classical art in ways that acknowledge both its original painted appearance and the cultural significance of its current unpainted state. Some museums have commissioned full-color reconstructions that show visitors how ancient sculptures and architectural elements might have originally appeared, while others focus on the technical processes by which modern scientists detect and analyze ancient pigment traces. Both approaches serve the important function of challenging popular assumptions about classical aesthetics while demonstrating the ongoing vitality of archaeological research. The evening shadows that lengthen across the Acropolis each day serve as a reminder that our understanding of the past is itself constantly changing, shaped by new discoveries, improved technologies, and evolving cultural perspectives that allow us to see familiar monuments with fresh eyes. The painted Greek temples that archaeologists are gradually revealing through painstaking scientific analysis represent not just a correction to previous misconceptions, but an invitation to imagine the ancient world as a place of sensory richness and artistic boldness that may have more in common with contemporary global cultures than with the austere classical ideal that dominated European thought for so many centuries. The twilight hour settles over the ancient agora of Athens, casting long shadows between the weathered columns of the Temple of Hephaestus, where a curious transformation becomes visible in the gentle evening light. Unlike its more famous neighbor, the Parthenon, which bears the scars of centuries and cannon fire, this remarkably preserved temple reveals one of the most fascinating secrets of Greek sacred architecture: its quiet metamorphosis from a shrine to the god of metalworking and crafts into a Christian church dedicated to St. George, and then into the archaeological monument that visitors admire today. This story of religious transformation represents just one chapter in the remarkable tale of how Greek temples survived the collapse of their original belief systems by adapting to serve entirely new spiritual purposes. As evening deepens around the temple's perfectly preserved Doric columns, the layers of history become almost tangible in the cooling air. In the 7th century CE, more than 1,000 years after its construction as a temple to Hephaestus, Christian converts quietly reconsecrated this building as the Church of St. George, carefully preserving its classical proportions while adding the minimal modifications necessary for Christian worship. The altar was moved, Christian symbols were discreetly added, and the ancient sculptural programs were either covered or reinterpreted, but the essential structure remained unchanged, a testament to both the architectural genius of the original builders and the practical wisdom of their Christian successors, who recognized beauty worth preserving. The gentle evening breeze carries with it stories of similar transformations that occurred throughout the former Greek world as Christianity gradually replaced the ancient polytheistic traditions. The most famous example remains the Parthenon itself, which underwent not one, but multiple religious conversions that reveal the complex spiritual history of the Mediterranean world. Originally built in the 5th century BC as a temple to Athena, patron goddess of Athens, it was first converted into the Church of the Theotokos, Mother of God, in the 5th century CE, then transformed into a mosque following the Ottoman conquest, and finally restored as an archaeological monument after Greek independence in the 19th century. In the soft light that filters through the Temple of Hephaestus each evening, visitors can observe the subtle architectural evidence of these transformations, while marveling at how little the building's essential character was altered by its change of purpose. Unlike the dramatic reconstructions that often accompanied such conversions elsewhere, the Greek approach to temple repurposing frequently involved minimal structural modification, suggesting a deep respect for the architectural achievement of the classical builders combined with practical recognition that these well-built structures could serve new purposes without fundamental alteration. The thick walls, durable construction, and spacious interiors that made Greek temples impressive venues for pagan worship proved equally suitable for Christian congregations seeking impressive settings for their own religious ceremonies. The evening shadows that play across the interior of the Temple of Hephaestus reveal another layer of this transformation story. The careful way in which Christian communities balanced respect for classical architecture with the need to create distinctly Christian worship spaces. Archaeological evidence suggests that most temple conversions involved the strategic placement of Christian imagery to redirect the spiritual focus of the space, while leaving the fundamental architectural elements unchanged. Frescoes depicting Christian themes were painted over ancient sculptural reliefs. Altars were repositioned to face east according to Christian tradition, and baptismal fonts were installed in locations that maximized their symbolic impact without compromising structural integrity. Far from Athens, the Cathedral of Syracuse in Sicily provides an even more dramatic example of successful temple repurposing, where the original Doric columns of a 6th century BCE Temple of Athena remain fully visible as integral elements of the Christian cathedral that has occupied the site since the 7th century CE. Evening visitors to this remarkable building can walk among ancient Greek columns while attending Catholic Mass, experiencing firsthand how two distinct religious traditions have been woven together into a single architectural fabric that honors both its pagan origins and its Christian identity. The practical motivations behind temple conversions become clear when considered from the perspective of early Christian communities who faced the enormous challenge of establishing their religion in societies where Impressive pagan temples had dominated the spiritual landscape for centuries. Rather than attempting to compete with the architectural grandeur of classical temples by building entirely new structures, a task that would have required resources and expertise that most Christian communities lacked, converts often chose to transform existing temples into Christian worship spaces, simultaneously claiming the spiritual authority of these ancient sites while redirecting their religious significance toward the new faith. The evening light that illuminates the surviving examples of converted temples reveals the sophisticated architectural strategies that made these transformations possible. At the Parthenon in Rome, technically a Roman temple, but built in the Greek architectural tradition, the conversion to the Church of St. Mary and the Martyrs required only the installation of Christian altars and imagery, while leaving the magnificent dome structure essentially unchanged. This approach preserved one of the ancient world's greatest architectural achievements, while creating a Christian worship space that could accommodate large congregations in a setting that communicated both spiritual authority and cultural continuity. The social dynamics of temple conversion become particularly fascinating when examined through the lens of community identity and cultural preservation. Archaeological evidence suggests that many temple conversions occurred gradually, with Christian and pagan worship sometimes coexisting within the same buildings, for extended periods before the final transition to exclusively Christian use. This gradual transformation process allowed local communities to maintain their connections to familiar sacred spaces while slowly adapting to new religious practices, creating a sense of spiritual continuity that eased the often traumatic transition from polytheistic to monotheistic worship. The technical challenges of converting temples into churches required creative solutions that demonstrate the practical ingenuity of early Christian communities. The east-facing orientation required for Christian worship, for example, often conflicted with the traditional Greek temple orientation, forcing architects to devise altar placements and congregation arrangements that satisfied Christian liturgical requirements while working within the constraints of existing classical structures. Similarly, the need for baptismal facilities, confession spaces, and other distinctly Christian architectural elements required careful integration with temple designs that had been optimized for very different religious practices. As night settles over the ancient monuments that bear witness to these transformations, the survival of so many converted temples speaks to both the durability of Greek architectural techniques and the wisdom of Christian communities who chose preservation over destruction. The Temple of Hephaestus, the Syracuse Cathedral, and dozens of other converted temples throughout the former Greek world represent successful examples of architectural recycling that preserved classical achievements while serving contemporary religious needs, approach that might serve as a model for modern preservation efforts facing similar challenges of adaptive reuse. The moonlight that bathes these ancient columns each night illuminates not just stone and mortar, but the remarkable human capacity for cultural adaptation and continuity. The Greek temples that became Christian churches and later archaeological monuments demonstrate how sacred spaces can transcend their original religious contexts to serve new spiritual and cultural purposes while retaining their essential character and significance. In their quiet transformation from pagan temples to Christian churches to historical monuments, these buildings embody the complex layering of Mediterranean civilization and the enduring power of beautiful architecture to inspire reverence across centuries and cultures. The gentle night breeze that moves through the temple of Hephaestus carries with it the whispered prayers of ancient metalworkers seeking divine blessing for their craft, medieval Christians praising St. George for his protection, and modern visitors marveling at the architectural genius that made all these transformations possible. In this convergence of ancient and modern, pagan and Christian, sacred and secular, the true miracle of Greek temple architecture reveals itself. Not just its aesthetic beauty or structural durability, but its capacity to serve human spiritual needs across millennia of religious and cultural change. The quiet that eventually settles over these monuments each night speaks not of endings but of continuity, the ongoing story of sacred spaces that have learned to change their gods while preserving their essential capacity to inspire wonder, reverence, and the profound human recognition that some places are too beautiful and too meaningful to be abandoned, regardless of which deities they were built to honor or which prayers echo within their ancient walls. The moon rises slowly over the temple of Apollo at Delphi, casting ethereal shadows through the ancient columns and illuminating what daylight visitors rarely notice, the subtle architectural hints that these sacred structures held far more than met the eye. As night settles over the mountainous sanctuary, the temple reveals its deeper secrets, not just the famous oracle's chamber, where prophetic vapors once rose from mysterious chasms, but the network of hidden rooms, storage chambers, and concealed spaces that made Greek temples function as complex institutions, serving purposes far beyond their obvious religious roles. In the gentle darkness that envelops the sanctuary, modern archaeologists and historians often reflect on how completely our understanding of temple life has been transformed by the discovery of these hidden spaces. Behind the magnificent facades that faced the public, Greek temples contained a labyrinth of practical chambers that served as treasuries, archives, workshops, and even primitive banks where city-states stored their most precious possessions. The Opisthodamus, literally, the back room, became as important as the main sanctuary, housing not only religious artifacts, but the accumulated wealth of entire communities who entrusted their gold, silver, and most valuable possessions to the protection of the gods. As the evening air grows cool around Delphi's ancient stones, the scale of these hidden operations becomes almost overwhelming to contemplate. The Parthenon's rear chambers, for example, contained not only the massive gold and ivory statue of Athena that served as the temple's centerpiece, but also functioned as the primary treasury of the Delian League, housing tribute from hundreds of allied city-states across the Aegean. Evening inventories conducted by temple officials would have cataloged everything from Persian coins captured in battle to exotic gifts from distant kingdoms, creating records that read more like the ledgers of international banks than simple religious institutions. Sophisticated security measures developed to protect these temple treasuries reveal just how Much wealth was concentrated in these sacred spaces. Multiple locks, complex key systems, and carefully supervised access protocols protected chambers where the accumulated riches of Greek civilization were stored behind walls of marble and bronze. Some temples employed elaborate mechanical devices, early precursors to modern safes, that required multiple priests working in coordination to access the most valuable deposits, ensuring that no single individual could compromise the security of community wealth. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the temple precincts were empty of worshippers, these hidden chambers buzzed with the activities that kept Greek city-states functioning. Scribes working by oil lamp maintained detailed records of deposits and withdrawals, tracking not only religious offerings, but loans, insurance contracts, and complex financial instruments that made possible the maritime trade networks spanning the Mediterranean. The temples had evolved into something approaching modern banks, offering secure storage, currency exchange, and even investment opportunities for merchants and private citizens who trusted divine protection more than any earthly security system. The workshops hidden within temple complexes produced far more than religious artifacts, though few visitors ever glimpsed these bustling centers of craft production. Master artisans working in temple-controlled ateliers created everything from fine jewelry and decorative metalwork to precision instruments used in astronomical observations and architectural measurements. The income from these commercial activities helped finance temple operations while maintaining the fiction that sacred spaces remain separate from the mundane concerns of commerce and industry. Evening shadows that fall across temple courtyards often obscure the evidence of another hidden function: the medical facilities that many temples maintained for both humans and animals. Long before the development of secular hospitals, temple healing centers provided sophisticated medical care based on combinations of religious ritual and practical treatment. Hidden chambers contained pharmacies stocked with medicinal herbs, surgical instruments, and treatment spaces where priests trained in medical arts combined prayer with procedures that often proved remarkably effective. Archaeological investigations conducted in the gentle light of dawn have revealed that many temples also functioned as primitive libraries and schools, with hidden chambers devoted to the preservation and copying of important texts. The famous Library of Alexandria may have been the most spectacular example, but countless smaller temples maintained collections of scrolls, tablets, and codices that preserved everything from religious texts to technical manuals, literary works, and scientific observations. These scholarly activities, conducted away from public view, made temples crucial centers of learning and cultural transmission throughout the ancient world. The secret communication networks that connected temples across the Greek world represent perhaps the most intriguing aspect of these hidden operations. Temple priests maintained correspondence that functioned as both religious communication and intelligence gathering, sharing information about political developments, trade conditions, natural disasters, and military movements. These networks, operating under the cover of religious authority, provided early warning systems and information exchanges that helped stabilize the often turbulent world of Greek city-states. as night deepens around the ancient temples. Their role as centers of astronomical observation becomes more apparent. Hidden chambers in many temples housed sophisticated instruments for tracking celestial movements, maintaining calendars, and predicting eclipses and other astronomical events. The priests who conducted these observations combined genuine scientific inquiry with religious interpretation, creating knowledge that served both practical and spiritual purposes while remaining largely invisible to ordinary worshippers who saw only the public face of religious ceremony. The hidden storage areas of major temples also served crucial roles during times of crisis, functioning as emergency supply centers that could support entire communities during sieges, famines, or natural disasters. Grain stores, oil reserves, and other essential supplies were maintained in temple chambers as insurance against catastrophic events, reflecting the practical wisdom of communities that understood the importance of long-term planning and resource management. These stockpiles, accumulated through religious offerings and careful management, often meant the difference between survival and catastrophe when communities faced existential threats. The secret diplomatic functions of temples become apparent when considering how these institutions served as neutral meeting grounds for negotiations between rival city-states. Hidden chambers provided secure venues for confidential discussions, while the sacred nature of temple grounds offered protection for ambassadors and negotiators who might be unsafe in more public venues. Treaties were signed, hostages exchanged, and complex diplomatic arrangements concluded in temple spaces that combined religious authority with practical security considerations. The mysterious religious ceremonies that took place in temples' inner chambers far from public view often involved elaborate rituals that combined genuine spiritual practices with what can only be described as ancient psychological therapy. Priests trained in what we would now recognize as counseling techniques helped individuals struggling with personal crises, family conflicts, or spiritual doubts through structured conversations and symbolic activities that provided emotional healing alongside religious guidance. These private sessions, conducted in chambers designed to inspire awe and reverence, offered psychological support that was often remarkably sophisticated for its time. As morning light begins to filter through the columns of ancient temples, the full complexity of these institutions becomes clear. Far from being simple places of worship, Greek temples functioned as community centers. Banks, hospitals, schools, observatories, emergency shelters, diplomatic venues, and psychological counseling centers, all while maintaining their primary religious identity. The hidden chambers that made these multiple functions possible remain largely invisible to casual visitors, but their influence on the development of Greek civilization was profound and lasting. The gentle sunrise that illuminates temple facades each day reveals only the public face of institutions that were far more complex and multifunctional than their classical appearance suggests. In the quiet spaces behind marble columns and bronze doors, Greek temples conducted the varied business of civilization while maintaining the spiritual authority that made their secular functions possible and trusted. The secret lives of these sacred spaces remind us that even our most idealized historical monuments were practical institutions serving the full range of human needs, combining the sacred and secular in ways that modern societies might find both familiar and inspiring. The afternoon sun hangs low over the Acropolis of Athens, its rays casting precise shadows that reveal one of the most sophisticated secrets of Greek temple architecture. As tourists climb the marble steps toward the Parthenon, few realize they are experiencing a masterpiece of visual deception. A building that appears perfectly straight and symmetrical, but contains not a single truly straight line or right angle. In the gentle light that bathes these ancient stones, the temple's most remarkable achievement becomes visible to those who know how to look. The systematic use of optical illusions that transform mathematical precision into visual poetry. As evening approaches and the crowds thin, the Parthenon reveals its hidden geometry to those patient enough to observe carefully. The massive columns that appear to rise perfectly vertical actually lean slightly inward if extended upward. They would meet at a point roughly 1 mile above the temple. This subtle inclination, invisible to casual observation, prevents the optical illusion that would make truly vertical columns appear to lean outward when viewed from ground level. The ancient architects understood that human perception differs from mathematical reality, and they adjusted their engineering to accommodate the quirks of human vision rather than the demands of geometric perfection. The temple's platform, which appears level to visitors walking across its surface, actually curves upward at the center by several inches along both its length and width. This deliberate warping counteracts the optical effect that would make a truly flat surface appear to sag in the middle when viewed from the approaches to the temple. The curved stylobate, the platform upon which the columns rest, required extraordinary precision in stone cutting, with each block carved to slightly different dimensions to create an overall curve so subtle that it remains invisible, while dramatically improving the building's visual impact. In the golden light of late afternoon, even more sophisticated illusions become apparent to trained observers. The corner columns of the Parthenon are slightly thicker than those along the sides and ends, compensating for the optical thinning effect that occurs when columns are silhouetted against bright sky rather than viewed against the solid background of the temple walls. Additionally, the spacing between columns varies subtly, with corner intervals slightly narrower than those at the center, creating a visual rhythm that appears perfectly regular while actually following complex mathematical relationships designed to enhance the building's proportions. Emphasis: the slight swelling in the middle of each column represents perhaps the most sophisticated optical correction employed by Greek architects. Perfectly straight-sided columns would appear to curve inward due to an optical illusion, creating an unpleasantly pinched appearance. The subtle bulge applied to each column, barely perceptible to direct measurement, but crucial to visual effect, counteracts this illusion and gives the columns a sense of organic vitality that pure geometry could never achieve. Each column required individual calculation and carving, making the temple's construction an enormously complex undertaking that demanded both mathematical precision and artistic sensitivity. The sun moves lower toward the horizon. The temple's most dramatic optical effect becomes visible. The carefully calculated interplay between light and shadow that transforms flat architectural elements into compositions of extraordinary visual depth. The triglyphs and metopes of the frieze, the moldings and profiles of the entablature, and the sculptural elements of the pediments all employ precise geometric relationships. They create shadow patterns, enhancing the building's three-dimensional impact. These effects required architects to understand not just structural engineering, but also the behavior of Mediterranean sunlight at different times of day and seasons of the year. The evening light reveals that these optical corrections extend beyond the major architectural elements to encompass every detail of the temple's design. The slight upward tilt of the horizontal lines in the entablature prevents them from appearing to droop, while the careful graduation of vertical elements creates a sense of upward movement that makes the building appear lighter and more graceful than its massive stone construction would otherwise suggest. Even the sculptural decoration was designed with optical effects in mind, with figures in the pediments carved in proportions that appear natural when viewed from ground level, but would seem distorted if examined at eye level. The sophisticated mathematics underlying these optical illusions demonstrates the remarkable scientific understanding possessed by Greek architects and their craftsmen. Creating the curved surfaces required for the stylobate and entablature demanded precise calculations and measurements, with each block cut to unique dimensions that contributed to the overall effect while maintaining structural integrity. The tools and techniques necessary for such precision including sophisticated measuring devices and mathematical methods for calculating curves and angles represent technological achievements that would not be equaled in European architecture for more than 1,000 years. Modern architectural analysis has revealed the full extent of the Parthenon's optical sophistication through laser measurements and computer modeling that allow precise documentation of every deviation from strict geometric regularity. These studies confirm that virtually every element of the building incorporates some form of optical correction, from the major structural elements down to individual decorative details. The cumulative effect of these adjustments creates a visual experience that transcends mere architectural achievement to approach the realm of sculpture, with the entire building functioning as a single, unified work of art designed to be appreciated from specific viewing angles and distances. The evening shadows that lengthen across the Acropolis each day also illuminate the practical challenges that Greek architects faced in implementing these optical corrections. The curved platform required not only precise stone cutting, but also careful coordination among hundreds of craftsmen working with individual blocks that had to fit together perfectly despite their unique dimensions. The column capitals, each slightly different in size and orientation to accommodate the column's inward lean, demanded both mathematical precision and artistic skill from the sculptors who carved them. The construction process must have resembled a vast three-dimensional puzzle, with every piece contributing to an overall effect that could only be evaluated Once the entire structure was complete, the influence of these Greek optical innovations extends far beyond their original context to shape architectural practice throughout Western civilization. Roman architects adopted and adapted these techniques, incorporating optical corrections into their own monumental buildings while adding innovations suited to their different architectural vocabulary. Renaissance architects rediscovered Greek principles through careful study of surviving monuments and theoretical treatises, integrating optical illusions into buildings that sought to recapture classical perfection. Even modern architects continue to employ variations of Greek optical corrections, using contemporary materials and construction techniques to achieve visual effects that honor ancient wisdom while serving contemporary needs. Twilight hour that settles over the Parthenon each evening provides the perfect conditions for appreciating these optical achievements, as the low-angled light emphasizes the subtle curves and precise proportions that make the building's visual impact so powerful. Visitors who take time to observe carefully can begin to perceive the sophisticated interplay between mathematical precision and artistic vision that transforms cold stone into architecture of extraordinary warmth and humanity. The building seems to breathe with life, its columns appearing organic rather than mechanical, its proportions suggesting natural growth rather than artificial construction. Preservation of these optical effects through more than 2 millennia of weathering, warfare, and neglect testifies both to the skill of the original builders and to the fundamental soundness of their engineering principles. While later additions, restorations, and damage have altered many details of the temple's appearance, the basic optical corrections remain intact and continue to produce their intended visual effects. Modern restoration efforts must take these deliberate irregularities into account, recognizing that apparent imperfections are actually sophisticated design features that contribute, essentially, to the building's architectural success. As night settles over the Acropolis and artificial lighting illuminates the Parthenon's columns, the temple's optical illusions continue to function exactly as their ancient creators intended. The building appears perfectly proportioned and harmonious, its mathematical irregularities invisible to casual observation, while creating the visual effects that have made it one of the most admired and influential buildings in human history. In the quiet darkness that surrounds these ancient stones, the genius of Greek architects speaks across 25 centuries, demonstrating that true architectural greatness lies not in rigid adherence to geometric rules, but in understanding how human perception transforms mathematical relationships into experiences of beauty, wonder, and spiritual elevation. The pre-dawn darkness settles over Cape Sunion, where the Temple of Poseidon stands silhouetted against the star-studded sky, its marble columns catching the first faint glimmer of approaching sunrise. In these quiet hours before the world awakens, when the ancient stones seem to hold their breath in anticipation, the temple reveals one of its most sophisticated secrets: its precise astronomical alignment that transforms this sacred structure into a monumental calendar, observatory, and celestial calculator. As the stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance, the temple demonstrates that Greek architects were not merely builders of beautiful buildings, but master astronomers who encoded the movements of heaven into their earthly constructions. The Temple of Poseidon, like many Greek temples throughout the ancient world, was positioned with mathematical precision to capture specific astronomical events that held both religious and practical significance for the communities they served. As the eastern horizon begins to pale with the approach of dawn, careful observers can witness the temple's primary astronomical function. Its east-west orientation ensures that the rising sun illuminates the interior sanctuary at the moment of the summer solstice, creating a dramatic interplay of light and shadow that transforms architectural space into cosmic theater. This alignment was no accident, but represented sophisticated understanding of solar mechanics and seasonal cycles that enabled ancient communities to maintain accurate calendars essential for agriculture, religious festivals, and civic governance. In the gentle pre-dawn light that gradually reveals the temple's weathered columns, the precision of these astronomical alignments becomes apparent to modern visitors who understand what to observe. The temple's architects calculated not only the position of the rising sun at different seasons, but also incorporated viewing angles that frame specific stars and constellations at crucial moments in their annual cycles. The constellation Perseus, associated with the hero whose exploits were celebrated in connection with Poseidon's dominion over the sea, rises directly above the temple's eastern pediment during certain seasons, creating celestial drama that reinforce the religious narratives associated with the site, while providing practical astronomical information for navigation and calendar keeping. The morning light that slowly illuminates the Aegean Sea beyond the temple reveals another layer of astronomical sophistication. The building's position on Cape Sunion was chosen not only for its dramatic visual impact, but also for its function as a maritime observatory where priests trained in astronomical observation could track celestial events crucial for sea travel. Ancient Greek sailors depended on stellar navigation for voyages across the Mediterranean, and temples like Sunion served as training centers where navigational astronomy was taught alongside religious instruction. The temple's elevated position and unobstructed horizon views made it an ideal location for observing star rises and sets, lunar phases, and planetary movements that guided both sacred and secular activities throughout the ancient world. As sunrise approaches and the sky begins to lighten in earnest, other Greek temples across the landscape reveal their own astronomical alignments and observational capabilities. The Parthenon in Athens, despite its fame for architectural and sculptural achievements, incorporates subtle astronomical orientations that connect its religious functions with celestial observations. The temple's east-west alignment ensures that the gold and ivory statue of Athena, housed within the cella, receives direct illumination from the rising sun on the goddess's birthday, creating an annual spectacle that combined religious celebration with astronomical precision. The building's architects understood that religious awe could be enhanced through careful coordination with natural phenomena, creating experiences that seemed miraculous to worshippers while demonstrating sophisticated technical knowledge. The Temple of Apollo at Delphi, perched on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, exemplifies the integration of astronomical observation with oracular practices that made the site famous throughout the ancient world. The temple's orientation incorporates multiple astronomical alignments that enabled priests to coordinate prophetic pronouncements with celestial events, adding cosmic authority to their religious and political guidance. The famous oracle delivered prophecies during specific seasons when astronomical conditions created optimal atmospheric effects in the temple's inner chambers, while the surrounding landscape was carefully surveyed to ensure that celestial observations could be made with maximum accuracy from the sacred precincts. The growing daylight reveals that these astronomical functions required sophisticated mathematical knowledge and observational skills that challenge conventional assumptions about ancient Greek scientific capabilities. Temple priests functioned as astronomer mathematicians who maintained detailed records of celestial movements, calculated eclipses and planetary positions, and created calendar systems that coordinated religious festivals with agricultural seasons and civic activities. The precision required for these calculations demanded understanding of geometric relationships, trigonometric principles, and long-term observational data collection that rivals modern astronomical practice in its systematic approach and mathematical sophistication. Sunrise that gradually illuminates temple sites across Greece reveals physical evidence of these astronomical functions in architectural details that casual visitors often overlook. Many temples incorporate carved markers, alignment stones, and observation platforms that facilitated precise celestial measurements while maintaining the building's primary religious identity. The stylobate platforms of major temples often include subtle markers that indicated optimal viewing positions for specific astronomical events, while the spacing and orientation of columns created sight lines that framed important stars and constellations at crucial moments in their annual cycles. Morning light reveals that Greek temples serve as centers of what we would now recognize as interdisciplinary education, where astronomy, mathematics, architecture, and religious studies were integrated into comprehensive curricula that trained both priests and civic officials in the knowledge necessary for effective community leadership. Students learned to calculate calendar dates, predict eclipses, navigate by stars, and coordinate religious ceremonies with natural phenomena while developing the mathematical skills necessary for architectural design, engineering projects, and commercial calculations. This educational integration demonstrates that ancient Greek civilization recognized no sharp boundaries between scientific and religious knowledge, treating astronomical observation as both practical necessity and spiritual practice. As the sun rises higher, it illuminates the full extent of temple complexes throughout the Greek world. The scope of their astronomical activities becomes clear in the layout and organization of sacred precincts. Many temple sites include multiple buildings oriented to different astronomical phenomena, creating comprehensive observational facilities that could track solar, lunar, and stellar movements throughout the year. These complexes functioned as primitive but effective observatories where systematic celestial observation supported both religious and secular activities, while advancing the mathematical and scientific knowledge that would ultimately influenced the development of formal astronomy and mathematics in the Hellenistic period. The brightening day reveals that these astronomical functions served practical community needs that extended far beyond religious ceremony or intellectual curiosity. Accurate calendars were essential for coordinating agricultural activities, legal proceedings, commercial transactions, and military campaigns across the diverse city-states that comprised Greek civilization. Temples provided standardized timekeeping services that enabled complex social coordination while there. Priest astronomers served as authoritative sources for calendar dates, seasonal predictions, and astronomical events that affected everything from farming schedules to diplomatic negotiations. The morning sun illuminates inscriptions and carved details on temple walls that preserve records of astronomical observations and calculations performed by ancient priest-scientists. These epigraphic records demonstrate the systematic nature of Greek astronomical practice while providing modern scholars with evidence of observational accuracy that challenges assumptions about ancient scientific capabilities. Temple archives contain detailed astronomical records spanning centuries, creating databases of celestial phenomena that enabled increasingly sophisticated predictions and calendar calculations while contributing to the theoretical advances that would characterize Hellenistic astronomy. The full daylight that now bathes Greek temples reveals their integration into broader networks of astronomical communication that connected sites across the Mediterranean world. Priest astronomers maintained correspondence regarding celestial observations, shared calculation methods, and coordinated calendar systems to ensure consistency across different regions and communities. This scholarly network created standardized astronomical practices that facilitated trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange while advancing collective understanding of celestial mechanics through systematic comparison of observations made at different geographical locations. The midsummer evening settles over the ancient sanctuary of Olympia, where the Temple of Hera stands as one of the most remarkable witnesses to a transformation that few visitors understand. The gradual evolution of Greek sacred architecture, from humble wooden structures to the marble masterpieces that define our image of classical antiquity. In the gentle twilight that bathes these weathered stones, archaeologists often marvel at how this particular temple preserves evidence of one of architecture's most significant transitions, the replacement of perishable wood with enduring stone, a process that unfolded over centuries and reveals ancient builders' practical wisdom, economic constraints, and evolving aesthetic ambitions. As evening deepens around the Heraion, as the Temple of Hera is known, the building's unique construction becomes visible to those who know how to interpret its architectural clues. Unlike the uniform marble construction of later temples, the Heraion displays a fascinating mixture of materials that chronicles the gradual replacement of its original wooden elements with stone substitutes installed over several centuries. The temple's columns, for example, represent multiple historical periods. Some remain wooden, darkened by age and weather. Others have been replaced with limestone. Still others showcase different varieties of local stone, each substitution reflecting the economic conditions, technical capabilities, and aesthetic preferences of different generations of builders and patrons. The story preserved in these mixed materials reveals one of the most important but least understood aspects of Greek temple construction: the systematic recycling and upgrading of sacred structures that enabled communities to maintain their religious buildings across centuries of changing circumstances. The evening light that filters through the Herion's columns illuminates evidence of ancient sustainability practices that would impress modern environmentally conscious builders. When wooden columns rotted or were damaged by weather, fire, or earthquake, they were replaced not with identical materials, but with more durable stone alternatives that gradually transformed the building's character while preserving its essential function and sacred identity. Archaeological investigations conducted in the quiet hours before dawn have revealed the sophisticated planning that made these material transitions possible. The original wooden temple at Olympia, like its counterparts throughout the Greek world, was constructed using traditional carpentry techniques that created buildings of remarkable beauty and structural integrity. Massive wooden posts supported roof beams hewn from local forests, while walls of sun-dried brick provided protection from the elements. These early temples, though less durable than their stone successors, possessed an organic warmth and human scale that created intimate worship environments perfectly suited to the religious practices of their communities. Transition from wood to stone unfolded gradually, driven by both practical necessity and evolving aesthetic preferences that reflected increasing Greek contact with stone building traditions of Egypt and the Near East. Evening documents preserved in temple archives describe the careful planning required for each material substitution. Wooden columns had to be measured precisely before replacement to ensure that new stone elements would support existing roof structures. Foundation systems required reinforcement to bear the increased weight of stone construction, and coordination among multiple craftsmen, quarrymen, transporters, stone carvers, and construction supervisors demanded project management skills that rivaled those of modern building contractors. Quarrying operations that supplied stone for temple construction represent another little-known aspect of Greek architectural achievement. Visible in the landscape surrounding major sanctuary sites or ancient extraction sites still bear the marks of systematic stone removal. The limestone quarries near Olympia reveal sophisticated understanding of geological conditions and stone properties that enabled ancient builders to select materials ideally suited for specific architectural functions. Different stone types were chosen for different building elements. Harder varieties for load-bearing columns and architraves, softer stones for decorative carving, and specialized materials for specific environmental conditions, such as exposure to weather or seismic activity. As night settles over the sanctuary, the transportation methods used to move massive stone blocks from distant quarries to temple sites become apparent in the ancient road systems and harbor facilities that supported these monumental construction projects. Moving multi-ton column drums and architrave blocks required engineering solutions that demonstrate Greek mastery of mechanical principles. wheeled vehicles designed to carry extraordinary loads, ramp systems that enabled controlled movement of heavy stones, and lifting devices that could position architectural elements with precision. The famous letter cuttings still visible on many temple blocks reveal the systematic marking, systems that enabled construction crews to identify and properly position individual stones within complex architectural compositions. The recycling practices that characterized Greek temple construction extended far beyond the replacement of wooden elements with stone substitutes to encompass the systematic reuse of materials from earlier structures. Evening explorations of temple foundations often reveal carved blocks and sculptural fragments from earlier buildings incorporated into later constructions, creating architectural palimpsests that preserve multiple layers of building history within single structures. These recycled materials serve both practical and symbolic purposes. They provided high-quality building stone while connecting new constructions with the sacred associations of their predecessors, creating continuity of religious meaning across generations of architectural development. The morning light reveals that this material recycling often involves sophisticated adaptation techniques that enabled builders to incorporate elements designed for different architectural contexts into new constructions. Sculptural reliefs might be turned face down to serve as foundation stones, preserving their artistic value while contributing to structural stability. Architectural elements from buildings of different scales could be combined through careful proportional adjustments, and decorative details could be modified or recarved to suit new aesthetic programs while retaining their essential character and craftsmanship quality. The economic implications of these recycling practices become clear when considering the enormous costs associated with quarrying, transporting, and carving new stone elements for temple construction. Evening calculations based on surviving ancient accounts suggest that material costs could represent 50% or more of total construction budgets, making the reuse of existing stones an essential strategy for communities seeking to maintain impressive sacred architecture within realistic financial constraints. The careful preservation and systematic reuse of high-quality materials enabled Greek communities to create architectural achievements that would have been economically impossible if built entirely from newly quarried stone. The skilled craftsmanship required for successful material adaptation and recycling demonstrates levels of technical knowledge and artistic sensitivity that challenge conventional assumptions about ancient building practices. Evening workshops where stone carvers modified recycled elements for new architectural contexts required understanding of structural engineering, aesthetic proportion, and artistic tradition that integrated practical problem-solving with creative vision. Master craftsmen had to evaluate the structural properties of existing stones, design modifications that would adapt them for new functions, and execute alterations that preserved the artistic integrity of original work while serving contemporary needs. The dawn-light reveals that these material evolution processes created temples of extraordinary historical depth and architectural complexity, where each stone element contributes to narratives that span centuries of community development and religious continuity. The Herayung at Olympia, with its mixture of wooden, limestone, and marble elements representing different historical periods, functions as a three-dimensional archive of architectural history that preserves evidence of changing building technologies, aesthetic preferences, economic conditions, and religious practices across the entire span of ancient Greek civilization. The structural engineering challenges created by mixing different materials within single buildings required innovative solutions that demonstrate Greek builders' mastery of mechanical principles and material properties. Wood, limestone, and marble respond differently to temperature changes, moisture exposure, and seismic activity, requiring connection methods and construction techniques that could accommodate these varying behaviors while maintaining overall structural integrity. The successful integration of diverse materials within structures that have survived for over 2 millennia testifies to engineering knowledge that combined empirical observation with theoretical understanding. The evening light settles gently over the marble quarries of Mount Pentelicus, where the ghostly white scars on the mountainside tell the story of one of history's most remarkable collaborations between human skill and natural beauty. In the quiet hours after the day's work is ended, when the dust from chisel and hammer has settled, these ancient extraction sites reveal the extraordinary network of craftsmen, engineers, and artists whose names history has largely forgotten, but whose collective genius made possible the temples that still inspire wonder more than 2 millennia after their completion. As twilight deepens around the quarry faces, the precise tool marks still visible in the stone speak to the sophisticated techniques developed by generations of Greek stone workers who transformed raw mountain into architectural poetry. The systematic approach to stone extraction required not only brute strength but mathematical precision, as quarrymen calculated exactly how to split massive blocks along natural fault lines while minimizing waste and ensuring that each piece would meet the exacting specifications demanded by temple architects. The evening shadows that fall across these worked surfaces reveal the ladder-like patterns of extraction, marks that enabled workers to remove stones of identical dimensions, creating the standardized building blocks that made possible the geometric perfection of classical architecture. In the gentle darkness that gradually envelops the quarry sites, the logistics of ancient construction become almost overwhelming to contemplate. Moving a single column drum weighing several tons from quarry to temple site required coordinated efforts involving dozens of workers, specialized transport equipment, and carefully planned routes that could accommodate loads of extraordinary size and weight. Evening studies of ancient road systems reveal the engineering solutions developed to support these massive transport operations: reinforced roadbeds, strategically placed ramps, and way station facilities where oxen, teams could rest and equipment could be maintained during journeys that might take weeks or months to complete. The workshops that surrounded major temple construction sites, buzzing with activity during evening hours when the Mediterranean heat subsided, as hundreds of specialized craftsmen worked by oil lamp and torchlight to prepare the countless architectural elements required for these monumental projects. Stone carvers, working with tools that had changed little since the Bronze Age, transformed rough quarry blocks into precisely fitted architectural elements through patient application of techniques passed down through generations of master craftsmen. The evening air carried the sounds of mallet against chisel, the rasp of files smoothing curved surfaces, and the quiet conversations of workers sharing technical knowledge that represented centuries of accumulated wisdom about working. Stone, the guild system that organized these craftsmen, created professional networks spanning the entire Greek world, enabling the rapid transmission of technical innovations and aesthetic developments that kept Greek architecture at the forefront of ancient engineering. Evening meetings of guild masters discussed not only immediate project needs, but long-term training programs that ensured continuity of skills across generations. Young apprentices learned not only how to cut stone, but how to read architectural plans, calculate proportions, and solve the complex three-dimensional puzzles that temple construction presented to every craftsman involved in the building process. As night settles over former construction sites, the archaeological evidence reveals the remarkable sophistication of ancient project management techniques that coordinated the efforts of diverse specialists working on different aspects of single buildings. Architects worked closely with master masons to ensure that foundation systems could support the enormous weights of completed structures. Sculptors coordinated with structural engineers to integrate decorative elements without compromising building stability. And financial administrators tracked costs and schedules with precision that would impress modern construction managers. The systematic approach to large-scale construction required documentation and communication systems that enabled complex projects to proceed smoothly despite involving hundreds of workers. Operating with limited technology. The lifting and positioning techniques developed for temple construction demonstrate Greek mastery of mechanical principles that would not be surpassed until the Industrial Revolution. Evening inspections of partially completed ancient structures reveal the evidence of sophisticated crane systems, pulley arrangements, and leverage devices that enabled relatively small crews to position massive architectural elements with extraordinary precision. The famous Lewis holes, still visible in many temple blocks, show where bronze lifting clamps were inserted, while the polished surfaces of some stones preserve the rope marks left by the tackle systems used to maneuver blocks into their final positions. The mathematical knowledge required for successful temple construction extended far beyond basic arithmetic to encompass geometric relationships, proportional systems, and engineering calculations that required understanding of principles not formally codified until centuries later. Evening calculations performed by ancient architects involved complex problems of structural load distribution, thermal expansion, and seismic resistance that demanded both theoretical knowledge and practical experience. The successful integration of optical corrections with structural requirements required mathematical sophistication that demonstrates Greek builders possessed advanced understanding of both aesthetic theory and engineering science. The seasonal rhythms that govern temple construction created annual cycles of activity that adapted building schedules to Mediterranean climate patterns and agricultural calendars that determined labor availability. Evening planning sessions coordinated construction activities with quarrying schedules, transport operations, and the availability of skilled workers who might be occupied with agricultural work during certain seasons. The multi-year duration of major temple projects required long-term resource planning that balanced immediate construction needs with sustainable extraction of materials and human resources. The quality control systems developed for temple construction ensured that architectural elements met exacting standards of precision and finish that have rarely been equaled in subsequent architectural history. Evening inspections by master builders checked not only dimensional accuracy, but surface finish, material quality, and structural soundness using techniques that combined visual assessment with practical testing. The systematic rejection of elements that failed to meet specifications created stockpiles of high quality but unused architectural components that were often incorporated into later projects or sold to other building programs. The artistic collaboration between architects and sculptors created integration of structural and decorative elements that transformed functional buildings into unified works of art. Evening conferences between design teams coordinated sculptural programs with architectural requirements, ensuring that decorative elements enhanced rather than compromised structural integrity while contributing to overall aesthetic impact. The successful integration of practical and artistic considerations required communication and cooperation among specialists whose individual excellence contributed to collective achievements that transcended the capabilities of any single craftsman or artist. The training systems that prepared craftsmen for temple construction created educational programs that combined theoretical instruction with hands-on experience in workshops that functioned as primitive engineering schools. Evening study sessions covered not only practical techniques, but historical precedents, regional variations in building practices, and innovations developed at other construction sites. The circulation of master craftsmen among different projects created informal networks for sharing technical knowledge and aesthetic innovations that kept Greek architecture dynamic and responsive to new challenges and opportunities. The economic impact of major temple construction projects extended far beyond immediate employment for building trades to encompass entire regional economies that supplied materials, transport services, and support facilities for construction operations. Evening calculations by ancient financial administrators tracked not only direct construction costs, but secondary economic effects that temple projects generated in surrounding communities. The multiplier effects of temple construction stimulated development of related industries: quarrying, metalworking, transport, and hospitality services that created prosperity, extending well beyond the immediate building sites. The preservation techniques developed by ancient builders ensured that their work would survive not only immediate structural stresses but centuries of weathering, seismic activity, and human neglect. Evening application of protective treatments, systematic maintenance procedures, and repair techniques demonstrated understanding of building preservation that enabled Greek temples to survive when structures built with less sophisticated methods had long since disappeared. The durability of Greek temple construction reflects not only quality of original workmanship, but systematic attention to long-term preservation that treated these buildings as investments in community prestige and religious continuity. The late evening stillness descends over the ancient theater of Epidaurus, where a whispered word spoken on the stage can be heard clearly in the highest seats, demonstrating one of the most remarkable but least understood aspects of Greek architectural genius, the sophisticated manipulation of sound and acoustics that transformed temples and public spaces into instruments of both spiritual and practical communication. As night settles over these weathered stones, the silence itself seems to hold secrets of ancient builders who understood that architecture must serve not only the eye but the ear, creating spaces where human voices could carry divine authority, and where the subtle interplay of sound and structure enhanced the emotional and spiritual impact of religious ceremonies. In the gentle darkness that envelops the sanctuary, modern acoustic engineers often marvel at the precision with which Greek architects calculated the behavior of sound waves within temple spaces, creating environments where priests' voices would resonate with otherworldly authority, while minimizing distracting echoes that might interfere with ceremonial clarity. The careful positioning of columns, the precise calculation of wall angles, and the strategic placement of sound-reflecting surfaces demonstrate understanding of acoustic principles that would not be formally codified until the development of modern physics. Yet ancient builders achieved results that contemporary architects struggle to replicate even with computer modeling and electronic testing equipment. The evening air around temples like the Parthenon carries with it evidence of acoustic design features that remain largely invisible to casual observers, but dramatically enhanced the religious experiences of ancient worshippers. The spacing between columns was calculated not only for visual proportion, but also for optimal sound transmission, creating corridors of enhanced acoustics that carried priestly chants and ritual music with extraordinary clarity. The internal chambers of temples were designed as resonating spaces where sacred utterances would gain an ethereal quality that suggested divine presence, while the positioning of altars and ceremonial areas took advantage of natural acoustic phenomena to amplify the spiritual impact of religious ceremonies. As midnight approaches and the temple precincts fall into profound quiet, the acoustic properties that made these buildings function as sophisticated sound instruments become apparent to sensitive listeners. The marble surfaces that appear purely decorative actually serve complex acoustic functions. Smooth areas reflect sound with minimal distortion, while carved details and sculptural elements scatter and diffuse acoustic energy in patterns that eliminate harsh echoes while preserving clarity. The curved surfaces of columns and the subtle variations in wall textures create acoustic environments that enhance speech intelligibility while adding a sense of spaciousness and mystery that reinforce the emotional impact of religious ceremonies. The acoustic engineering of Greek temples required understanding of mathematical relationships between architectural dimensions and sound wave properties that demonstrates sophisticated scientific knowledge, disguised within apparently simple geometric forms. The proportional systems that determined column spacing, ceiling heights, and interior volumes were calculated to create optimal reverberation tones for different types of ceremonial activities. Spoken liturgies required shorter reverberation periods for maximum clarity, while chanted prayers and musical performances benefited from longer sound decay that added richness and emotional depth to ritual experiences. The nighttime stillness reveals how temple architects manipulated the acoustic environment outside sacred buildings as well as within them, creating graduated zones of sound transmission that enhanced the ceremonial approach to sacred spaces. The arrangement of temple complexes, the positioning of auxiliary buildings, and even the landscaping of sacred precincts were designed to control ambient noise levels while creating acoustic pathways that guided worshippers' attention toward the central religious activities. Approaching pilgrims would hear ceremonial sounds from increasing distances as they moved through carefully designed acoustic environments that built anticipation and emotional engagement long before they reached the main temple buildings. The dawn hours reveal evidence of acoustic coordination between multiple buildings within temple complexes, creating environments where ceremonies conducted in different locations could be synchronized through carefully planned sound transmission. The positioning of secondary temples, treasuries, and administrative buildings took into account not only visual relationships, but also acoustic connections that enabled complex religious performances involving multiple sites. Antiphonal singing, responsive chanting, and coordinated ritual activities could be conducted across considerable distances through acoustic design that treated entire sanctuary complexes as unified musical instruments. The morning light illuminates physical evidence of ancient acoustic technologies that enhanced temple sound environments through ingenious mechanical devices and architectural features. Bronze resonators embedded in walls and floors amplified specific frequency ranges while filtering out unwanted noise, creating acoustic environments optimized for human voice ranges used in religious ceremonies. Speaking tubes and sound channels built into temple walls enabled priests to communicate between different areas of buildings while creating mysterious disembodied voices that enhanced the supernatural atmosphere of religious rituals. The influence of acoustic considerations on temple decoration becomes apparent when examining sculptural programs and architectural ornament that served both artistic and acoustic functions. The positioning of sculptural reliefs was calculated to create sound reflection patterns that enhanced ceremonial acoustics, while decorative elements like carved moldings and ornamental details functioned as acoustic diffusers that prevented harsh echo formation. The integration of aesthetic and acoustic concerns demonstrates the sophisticated understanding that Greek architects possessed about the relationship between visual beauty and auditory experience in creating emotionally powerful architectural environments. The acoustic innovations developed for temple construction influenced the design of other Greek public buildings, creating a tradition of acoustically sophisticated architecture that reached its culmination in theaters like Epidaurus, but originated in the religious architecture of temple complexes. The techniques developed for enhancing priestly voices in sacred settings were adapted to enable actors and orators to communicate with large audiences, while the sound control methods perfected in temple courtyards provided models for creating acoustic environments suitable for political assemblies and legal proceedings. The preservation of acoustic properties in ancient temples presents unique challenges from modern conservation efforts that must balance historical authenticity with practical accessibility requirements. Modern visitors, electrical systems, and climate control equipment create acoustic environments very different from those experienced by ancient worshippers. While restoration efforts must consider not only visual authenticity, but also the acoustic consequences of material choices and structural modifications. Contemporary understanding of ancient acoustic design helps guide restoration decisions that preserve both the visual and auditory aspects of Greek architectural achievement. The evening shadows that fall across temple sites each day remind us that Greek architects created buildings designed to engage all human senses, not merely the visual perception emphasized by most architectural analysis. The sophisticated acoustic engineering embedded within temple designs demonstrates that ancient builders understood architecture as a total sensory experience that combined visual beauty, tactile textures, spatial relationships, and acoustic environments to create emotionally and spiritually powerful spaces. Their achievement in integrating multiple sensory considerations within unified architectural compositions represents a level of design sophistication that continues to inspire and challenge contemporary architects seeking to create buildings that serve the full range of human experiential needs. The gentle night breeze that moves through these ancient columns carries with it not only the echoes of vanished ceremonies, but also the continuing influence of acoustic principles that remain relevant for contemporary architecture. The Greek, understanding that sound shapes human experiences profoundly as visual beauty, provides timeless guidance for creating buildings that enhance, rather than diminish, the human activities they shelter, whether sacred or secular, ancient or modern. As peaceful quiet settles over these acoustic monuments, they continue to demonstrate that true architectural greatness lies not in any single aspect of design, but in the successful integration of multiple considerations: structural, aesthetic, functional, and experiential, that serve human needs with such completeness that the buildings continue to move and inspire visitors across millennia of changing use and understanding. The first light of dawn spreads gently across the Aegean, illuminating the scattered islands where fragments of ancient temples catch the morning sun like scattered jewels of memory. In this peaceful hour when the modern world still sleeps, the enduring influence of Greek temple architecture becomes most apparent, not merely in the physical stones that have survived millennia of weather and war, but in the countless buildings, monuments, and sacred spaces around the world that continue to echo the proportions, principles, and profound understanding of beauty first perfected on these ancient hillsides. As the soft morning light touches the columns of temples from Sicily to Turkey, from the Black Sea shores to the North African coast, The scope of Greek architectural influence reveals itself as perhaps the most successful cultural export in human history. The Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian orders developed in these sacred precincts provide the grammatical foundation for architectural languages that span continents and centuries. From the neoclassical buildings of Washington, D.C., to the colonial architecture of India, from the grand railway stations of Victorian England to the courthouse squares of small American towns, morning breeze carries with it stories of rediscovery and revelation that continue to unfold as modern archaeological techniques reveal new secrets hidden within familiar monuments. Ground-penetrating radar detects foundation systems of unprecedented complexity. Laser scanning documents minute details invisible to traditional measurement. And spectrographic analysis reveals pigment traces that reconstruct the brilliant colors once covering these now white stones. Each technological advance brings us closer to experiencing Greek temples as their builders and worshippers knew them, not as austere exercises in mathematical perfection, but as vibrant, living spaces designed to engage all human senses in the service of both gods and community. The gentle sunrise illuminates conservation. Workshops where contemporary craftsmen struggle with challenges their ancient predecessors would recognize. How to repair earthquake damage without destroying historical authenticity. How to protect marble surfaces from acid rain and pollution. How to accommodate millions of modern visitors while preserving the contemplative atmosphere that makes these sites spiritually meaningful. The techniques being developed for temple preservation often draw directly on ancient methods, as conservators discover that traditional lime mortar and careful stone selection practices developed 2 millennia ago often outperform modern materials in Mediterranean climates. In the growing light of day, the educational influence of Greek temples becomes visible in architecture schools, museums, and cultural institutions worldwide, where students continue to study proportional systems, optical corrections, and integration of structural and aesthetic considerations that remain as relevant today as they were in the 5th century BCE. The measured drawings, detailed photographs, and 3-dimensional models of Greek temples serve not merely as historical documents, but as active teaching tools that demonstrate timeless principles of design excellence, community service, and the patient pursuit of beauty that serves human needs across generations and cultures. The morning sun reveals digital reconstructions and virtual reality experiences that enable contemporary visitors to walk through Greek temples as they appeared in their original glory, complete with brilliant polychromy, bronze fixtures, ivory and gold statuary, and the complex ceremonial activities that once filled these spaces with movement, music, and meaning. These technological resurrections serve not only educational purposes, but spiritual ones, reconnecting modern visitors with the profound sense of the sacred that motivated the original builders and continues to draw millions of pilgrims to these ancient sites each year. As daylight strengthens, the ongoing research into Greek temple construction reveals new appreciation for the sophisticated engineering knowledge embedded within apparently simple geometric forms. Computer modeling of seismic resistance demonstrates that ancient builders developed construction techniques that enable structures to survive major earthquakes through flexibility rather than rigid strength. Thermal analysis shows how material choices and construction methods create stable internal environments that protect both human occupants and precious contents from the extremes of Mediterranean climate. Brightening sky illuminates the networks of scholars, craftsmen, and cultural institutions that maintain living connections between ancient Greek architectural wisdom and contemporary building practice. Stone carvers trained in traditional techniques work alongside structural engineers to restore damaged elements. Historians collaborate with computer scientists to create increasingly accurate digital models. And architects study ancient, proportional systems to inform the design of modern buildings that serve contemporary needs while honoring timeless aesthetic principles. The morning light reveals the continuing spiritual influence of Greek temples and religious architecture worldwide, where the sense of approaching the sacred through carefully orchestrated spatial sequences, proportional harmony, and integration with landscape continues to inform the design of churches, mosques, synagogues, and temples serving diverse faiths and communities. The universal human responses to beauty, proportion, and craftsmanship that Greek temple builders understood so well transcend specific religious traditions to serve the fundamental human need for spaces that elevate daily experience and connect individuals with something greater than themselves. As the sun climbs higher, the touristic and economic influence of Greek temples becomes apparent in the millions of visitors who travel to Greece each year, specifically to experience these ancient monuments, generating economic activity that supports entire communities while creating challenges of crowd management, infrastructure development, and cultural preservation that require careful balance between accessibility and protection. The temples that once served local communities now function as global cultural resources that belong to all humanity while remaining rooted in specific places with particular histories and ongoing needs. Full daylight illuminates the artistic influence of Greek temples in countless paintings, sculptures, photographs, and other visual arts that have drawn inspiration from these monuments for centuries. From romantic landscape paintings that use temple ruins to evoke philosophical meditation on the passage of time, to contemporary installations that reinterpret ancient forms for modern audiences, Greek temples continue to serve as sources of artistic inspiration that connect contemporary creativity with ancient wisdom. The bright morning sun reveals the literary and philosophical influence of these ancient buildings in poetry, fiction, and scholarly writing that uses Greek temples as symbols of cultural achievement, aesthetic perfection, and the human capacity to create beauty that endures across millennia. Writers from Byron to contemporary authors continue to find in these ancient stones metaphors for permanence and change, tradition and innovation, individual creativity and collective accomplishment that speak to fundamental aspects of human experience. As the day progresses, the scientific influence of Greek temple study becomes apparent in fields ranging from structural engineering to materials science, where ancient building techniques inform contemporary research into earthquake resistance, thermal performance, acoustic design, and sustainable construction practices. The interdisciplinary approach pioneered by Greek builders, combining mathematical precision with aesthetic sensitivity, practical function with spiritual meaning, provides models for contemporary research that seeks to address complex challenges through integration of diverse forms of knowledge. The afternoon light illuminates the political and social influence of Greek temple architecture in government buildings, civic centers, and public spaces worldwide that use classical forms to communicate values of democracy, justice, cultural achievement, and community service. The association of Greek architectural elements with these ideals reflects both historical connections and ongoing recognition that the buildings we create shape the communities we become, making architectural design a form of civic responsibility that serves public welfare as well as individual needs. The later afternoon reveals the commercial influence of Greek temples in retail architecture, residential design, and landscape planning. It adapts classical proportions and details to contemporary functions, while maintaining connection with traditions of beauty and craftsmanship that enrich daily life. From garden temples in suburban landscapes to shopping centers, they use classical elements to create dignified commercial environments. The influence of ancient Greek architecture continues to shape the built environments where contemporary life unfolds. As evening approaches and the light begins to soften, the therapeutic influence of Greek temples becomes apparent in healthcare facilities, meditation centers, and wellness environments that use principles of proportion, natural lighting, and integration with landscape to create healing spaces that serve both physical and psychological needs. The ancient Greek understanding that beautiful environments promote human well-being continues to inform contemporary approaches to architecture that serves not merely practical functions but enhances the quality of human experience. The deep midnight hour settles over the sacred hills of Greece, where ancient temples stand in silent communion with the stars, their weathered columns bearing witness to more than 2 millennia of human dreams, struggles, and enduring hope for beauty that transcends the boundaries of time itself. In this profound stillness, when the modern world retreats into sleep and the ancient stones seem to breathe with the rhythm of eternity, the final secrets of Greek temple architecture reveal themselves not as historical curiosities, but as living testimonies to the persistent human belief that some things are too precious to lose, too beautiful to abandon, and too meaningful to let slip quietly into the darkness of forgotten memory. As the night deepens around these monuments, the extraordinary efforts undertaken to preserve and protect them become apparent in the thin scaffolding that surrounds damaged columns, the protective shelters that shield vulnerable sculptures, and the careful documentation that records every stone, every inscription, every trace of ancient pigment for future generations who will inherit both the physical temples and the responsibility to continue their care. The conservators who work by moonlight with laser scanners and photogrammetry equipment carry forward a tradition of guardianship that stretches back through centuries of monks who maintained temple sites as churches, travelers who sketched and measured ruins for posterity, and local communities who preserved ancient stones even when their original meanings had been forgotten. In the gentle darkness that embraces these sacred sites, the ongoing discoveries that continue to emerge from familiar monuments demonstrate that Greek temples remain active sources of knowledge and wonder rather than mere relics of a vanished past. Ground-penetrating radar reveals foundation systems of unprecedented complexity. Chemical analysis of mortar samples provides new insights into ancient construction techniques. And digital reconstruction of missing architectural elements enables scholars to understand spatial relationships and visual effects that had been lost for centuries. Each technological advance brings fresh appreciation for the sophistication of ancient builders while raising new questions that ensure Greek temple architecture will continue to challenge and inspire researchers for generations to come. The midnight breeze that moves through ancient columns carries with it the whispered conversations of international teams of archaeologists, architects, engineers, and craftsmen who collaborate across cultures and disciplines to solve preservation challenges that transcend national boundaries and political differences. The techniques being developed to stabilize earthquake-damaged foundations in Greece inform restoration projects in Turkey. Methods for protecting marble surfaces from acid rain, proven successful in Athens, are adapted for monuments in Rome. And digital documentation standards established for the Parthenon become models for heritage preservation worldwide. These temples that once served local communities now function as laboratories for developing conservation approaches that serve the entire human heritage. As the stars wheel overhead in their eternal patterns, the educational programs that bring Greek temple architecture to life for new generations become visible in the museum exhibitions, virtual reality experiences, and hands-on workshops that enable contemporary students to experience the planning, construction, and decoration of these ancient buildings. Children who may never travel to Greece can walk through digitally reconstructed temples in their full polychromic glory. Architecture students can manipulate three-dimensional models to understand the integration of structural and aesthetic considerations. And craftsmen can learn traditional stone carving techniques that connect them directly with ancient building traditions. In the profound quiet of deepest night, the spiritual influence of Greek temples extends beyond their obvious religious and cultural functions to encompass their role as places of contemplation, inspiration, and connection with forces larger than individual human concerns. The pilgrims who continue to visit these sites, seeking not historical knowledge but spiritual renewal, demonstrate that sacred architecture retains its power to touch human hearts and souls across millennia of changing beliefs and circumstances. The sense of the sacred that motivated the original builders continues to draw visitors who find in these ancient stones a refuge from the complexity and noise of contemporary life. The pre-dawn darkness reveals the environmental challenges facing ancient monuments in an era of climate change, air pollution, and increasing tourist pressure that require new approaches to preservation that balance accessibility with protection. Rising sea levels threaten coastal temple sites. Changing rainfall patterns affect the stability of ancient foundations. And the chemical composition of urban air creates preservation challenges unknown to previous generations of conservators. The solutions being developed demonstrate that caring for ancient architecture requires not only understanding of the past, but active engagement with contemporary environmental and social challenges. As the first hint of dawn touches the eastern horizon, the economic significance of Greek temples becomes apparent in the tourism industry that supports entire regions, the craft traditions that maintain ancient skills, and the educational institutions that train new generations of scholars and conservators. The temples that once served as treasuries for ancient city-states now generate economic activity that enables their own preservation while supporting communities that might otherwise lack sustainable economic foundations. This economic dimension of temple preservation demonstrates that practical and idealistic motivations often align in supporting the care of cultural heritage. The growing daylight illuminates the technological innovations being developed specifically for heritage preservation. New materials that can repair ancient stone without altering its appearance or behavior. Monitoring systems that detect structural problems before they become critical. And climate control methods that protect vulnerable elements while maintaining the authentic experience of visiting these sites. These innovations represent investment in the future based on recognition that some human achievements are too valuable to lose and too important to abandon to the forces of time and neglect. In a gentle morning light that begins to warm the ancient stones, the community of people dedicated to understanding and preserving Greek temple architecture reveals itself as a global network of scholars, craftsmen, officials, and volunteers who share commitment to maintaining these monuments for future generations. Their work demonstrates that cultural preservation is not merely a technical challenge, but a moral commitment that reflects fundamental human values about memory, beauty, and responsibility to the future. As sunrise approaches and the ancient temples prepare to welcome another day of visitors, researchers, and caretakers, the eternal message of these monuments becomes clear. They stand not merely as reminders of past achievement, but as challenges to contemporary society to create architecture and communities worthy of similar preservation efforts. The builders who created these temples understood that their work would outlast their own lives, and they built accordingly with materials chosen for durability, techniques designed for permanence, and aesthetic vision intended to inspire wonder across centuries of changing human circumstances. The morning sun that rises over Greek temples each day illuminates not endings, but continuity, the ongoing conversation between past and present, ancient wisdom and contemporary knowledge, individual creativity and collective responsibility that keeps these monuments alive and meaningful across the millennia. In their patient endurance through war and peace, earthquake and storm, neglect and restoration, they demonstrate that some human achievements possess the strength to survive whatever history brings, offering permanent testimony to the capacity for beauty, wisdom, and hope that defines humanity at its finest. The peaceful atmosphere that settles over these ancient sites each morning speaks not of completion, but of continuation, the ongoing work of preservation, study, and appreciation that ensures Greek temple architecture will continue to inspire and instruct future generations while providing tangible connection with the achievements of human civilization at one of its most creative and hopeful moments. In the quiet perfection of their proportions, the subtle sophistication of their construction, and the enduring power of their beauty, these temples continue to whisper the eternal human conviction that some things are worth preserving, some achievements merit perpetual care, and some beauty deserves to last as long as human memory endures. As morning light fills the ancient sanctuaries with warmth and promise, the Greek temples stand ready for another day of revelation, preservation, and wonder, eternal guardians of memory who continue their patient vigil over the dreams and aspirations that connect all human generations in the endless quest for beauty, meaning, and connection with the forces that give life its deepest significance and most enduring hope.